Hey everyone, Mr. Sujano here. In today's video, we're taking a look at the 8bitdo Pro 2 controller. Let's get started. Alright, to kick things off, when 8bitdo announced the Pro 2 controller, to say I was excited for it would be a little bit of an understatement. And by a little bit, I mean a lot of an understatement. I was pumped for this thing. I pre-ordered it right away, I got it in the mail, and I've had a chance to test it out. Now let's see whether or not this thing delivers. Now taking a quick look at the box, and it's pretty easy to tell what version of the Pro 2 I went with. I went with the old Game Boy theme version here, and they call it the G Classic Edition. It's compatible with the Switch, macOS, Windows, Steam, Android, and the Raspberry Pi. Opening up the box and the controller is the very first thing you see, covered in a sheet of plastic. Underneath the controller we can see a USB-C cable as well as an instruction manual. The 8bitdo cable does look nice, it has some nice branding on it, but it's only about 3 feet long and it does feel very cheap. I was a little bit disappointed with this cable. Thankfully though, the Pro 2 controller feels amazing. It feels extremely well built. The first thing you'll notice about it are the triggers underneath. I thought I'd be accidentally pressing these during gameplay, but it turns out I don't. They're well weighted and well positioned. The joysticks feel pretty good as well. I'd say they're similar to a DualShock 4. One of 8bitdo's greatest strengths on their controllers are their D-pads, and this controller is no different. The D-pad on this controller is amazing. I would argue it's better than a lot of first-party D-pads out there. It's probably one of the best D-pads on the market right now. And you can see when you press down in the center, it still allows you to pivot. The start and select buttons are rubber, just like the SNES, and the L and R buttons have a very familiar feel to them. There's not really a lot of resistance or weight behind the triggers here. They press in very easily. They're a little easier to press in and a little bit wider than a DualShock 4. The back of the controller is textured for grip, and there's a switch with SADX on it. S for the Switch, A for Mac, D for Android, and X for PC. The top of the controller has the Bluetooth pair button as well as a USB-C connector for charging. And these two little cutouts here and here are for a phone clip to attach to. Amazon just hasn't shipped it to me yet. The Pro 2 features a removable battery, one feature that I really appreciate. Although trying to get that battery out is another story altogether. I ended up having to get a butter knife out to kind of wedge this battery out of place. If you're curious, here is the battery. It's 1000 milliamp hours and it lasts for about 20 hours. This controller also works with AA batteries if you want to use those instead. I also had to use a butter knife to wedge them out once they're put in. They're in there pretty tight. If you do want to open this controller up, you will need a security bit, so it takes a TR6 or a T6. One of the best features about this controller is that you can configure almost everything about it, and you can set 3 different profiles via the selector switch on the front here. To set up a profile, you just download free software on your Android device, on your iOS device, or on your PC or Mac. For this video, I'll be using the 8bitdo Ultimate software off the Google Play Store, because I have an Android device. Now, it doesn't have the highest rating. It's sitting right now at 2.5 stars out of 5, and I think that's for 2 different reasons. The first reason is that this software is not compatible with the Pro Plus controller. If you have a Pro Plus controller, you have to use the PC version of the software. You can't use the Android app. And the second reason here I think that this doesn't have a high rating is because of the switch on the back of the Pro 2. So there's a setting here that says A, and I thought A meant Android. So I switched it over to A, I paired it with my phone, and the app wasn't picking it up. And that's because A doesn't stand for Android. A stands for Apple, which is kind of interesting. D stands for Android, for direct input. So you have to switch this over to D for Android and then you're good to go. So here's the app up and running on my phone, and right now it's searching for the controller. Once it finds your controller, it should look something like this. Interestingly enough, if you press the B button, it says press again to exist. I didn't know if this meant exit or if this meant for the controller to exist on the phone as a profile. I wasn't quite sure, so I pressed it again and it exited the app. So there's a typo here, exist is exit. On the main menu, the very first option here is profile. By default, everything is set to profile 1. If you want a second or third profile, this is where you create them. In the mapping menu, you can change every single button on this controller except select, start, and your profile switch. Everything else is completely fair game, and I really like that. On the sticks menu, you can test out your joysticks, you can set the sensitivity here, you can invert them if you want. These joysticks are very sensitive, and I was really impressed with that. There's also an option in here to swap your sticks and a super handy option to swap the D-pad and the left stick. This comes in handy when you're playing a game and it's forcing you to use the joystick when you'd rather use the D-pad, or vice versa. In the triggers menu, you can adjust the sensitivity and the range of the left and the right trigger. In the vibrations menu, you can tweak the left and the right vibration. The left is the heavier vibration and the right is the lighter, more sensitive one. There's a macros menu where you can set different button combinations and sequences and map them to any button on the controller. And lastly, in the settings menu, you can check for firmware updates for your controller. Now, I've used this controller on 4 different systems. I used it on a Raspberry Pi, I used it on my PC, I used it on my phone, and on the Nintendo Switch. All had very similar results. If you can, I highly recommend using this controller in wired mode. In wired mode on the Switch, on the Raspberry Pi, on the PC, and on my phone, this thing was bulletproof. It was amazing. And as for the Bluetooth functionality on the controller, this one's a little bit interesting. People either like it or they hate it. In terms of Bluetooth on this controller, I would say it's very good. It's pretty much the same as every other 8bitdo controller out there. So if you don't like the Bluetooth in 8bitdo controllers, you're not going to like this one. This works pretty much the same as all other 8bitdos I have, and I actually quite like it. The closer you are to your device with this controller, the better success you're going to have. For example, if you're using this with an Android phone and you have the Android phone clip and the Android phone is sitting right on top of the controller, then you'll have a pretty good time with it. If you're using this from maybe across the room or underneath a desk and you have something on top of the desk, you're going to run into signal issues. The signal is very touchy. If you have clear line of sight and nothing's in the way of it, you're not going to have an issue. But as soon as you introduce anything in the way, even just an arm, it sometimes blocks that Bluetooth signal. So right now I've got the Pro 2 paired to the Nintendo Switch via Bluetooth and I'm running Ultra Street Fighter 2. Everything seems to be going okay. I can throw fireballs, it's not dropping any inputs. I can do some shoryukens here, no issues. And I'll try for a super here and yeah, no issue again. Everything's going okay. Now here's Breath of the Wild up and running and the controller seems to be working absolutely fine. This controller also supports motion controls, but I do find they do become misaligned every now and then. Some people have no problems with this, but for me, it's a bit of a hassle. So just be careful here when you're using the 8bitdo controller. I find it sometimes goes a little bit out of sync. If you're buying the 8bitdo controller specifically for its motion controls, you might be better off with something else. I mean, I don't want to say that these motion controls are horrible because they're really not. They're actually pretty good for a third-party controller. But again, they're not as good as the Joy-Cons. I will say though, on the Switch, there are a few features missing from this controller that some people might like. First and foremost, this won't scan amiibo. There are no IR sensors in this controller, and on top of all of that, you cannot use the controller to wake up the Switch. Now I've got Street Fighter V up and running, and I have the Pro 2 plugged into my computer in X input mode. Again, I'm running into absolutely no issues with this D-pad. The D-pad on this controller is amazing. I think 8bitdo does an amazing job with their D-pads, and honestly, I think it's one of the best in the industry right now. Now let's quickly go over what I liked and didn't like about this controller. You already know I like the D-pad on this thing. The back buttons here, I actually really like these as well. They're well placed and they're not easy enough to press in that you press them by accident a whole bunch, and they're not hard enough to press in that they become strenuous to use after a while. The face buttons, the joysticks, the bumpers, the triggers, they all feel good. The fit and finish on the Pro 2 is also very nice. The controller feels solid. The weight of this thing is very similar to a DualShock 4. The buttons are just a little bit closer together. The availability of the ultimate software on Android and iOS devices to change these controllers on the fly is amazing. I think this is a really cool feature. Now let's get into what I don't like about this controller. First up, I don't really like the motion controls all that much. I mean, yeah, they're on the controller and yeah, they're functional, but at the same time, I still feel they could be a little bit better. The vibration in this controller is also a little bit outdated when compared with current gen systems. This doesn't have the level of vibration that the Joy-Cons have, that the DualSense has, or even the new Xbox controller has. This feels really last gen when it comes to vibration, and that's not a good thing. Next, the included cable here is way too short. This is a 3-foot cable, and that's being generous. I wouldn't mind seeing something like a 5 or a 6-foot cable if you're going to use it in wired mode. I mean, I guess they don't anticipate everybody using this in wired mode, considering it's primarily a Bluetooth controller. but at the same time, this on a PC in wired mode is very, very good. And the last thing I don't really like about this, and I don't even know if this is 8bitdo's fault or just a software thing with Nintendo, but you still can't wake up a Nintendo Switch with this. Now let's take a look at the price of this controller. So right now at the time of this video, it's listed for 50 bucks. Well, $49.99 if you want to be super technical about it. There are 3 different colors available: the G Classic, which I currently have, there's the Black Edition, which also looks good, and the Gray Edition, which also looks really good. Overall, here at 50 bucks for this controller, I think it's well worth it. I think it's very well priced. Obviously, cheaper is better, but at the same time here, given the versatility of this controller, I think it's really good. If you want to use this for an Android device, if you want to use this for a Nintendo Switch, PC, or Raspberry Pi, this is one controller that can kind of do it all. I'm being honest with you when I say right now, this is one of my favorite controllers in my collection. To me, this is the Super Nintendo controller that has been brought up to date. It's been modernized for today's gaming, and I really like that about it. I'm a huge fan of the SNES controller. This just feels really, really good. Now, if my opinion on this controller changes at all, I'll let you know in the comments below, or I'll just do another video on it, or maybe just do both. Right now, this will be my daily driver, so I'll be using it with my PC, my Switch, my Android phone, and also with a Raspberry Pi. It's going to get quite a bit of use, so I will probably know fairly soon if anything changes. Anyways, that is all I've got for today. Let me know your thoughts on the 8bitdo Pro 2 in the comments below. If you like this video, leave a like. If you didn't like this video, leave a like. Hit that subscribe button, check out my other videos. Thank you everyone, take care.